In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in black and white emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special edition of America in Black and White, where we're coloring conversations on the canvas of America. This episode is special because I'm bringing you guys this live coverage of what is possibly going to be a government shutdown. Yes, there's a possibility of a government shutdown. So, what I'm going to do in this episode is that I'll be explaining to you guys how we got here, who it hurts, and what comes next. So, the overview of this special episode unpacks the looming federal government shutdown, breaking down its origins, political dynamics, and real world consequences. I myself am going to guide you guys through the history, the stakes, and the human impact, especially on marginalized communities, federal workers, and everyday Americans. This is not just political theater, it's a structural crisis with lasting effects. And when I say that, that means that this is affecting each and every individual. There are degrees depending upon who you are and your status, especially from an economic perspective, as to how and when the effects of this is going to reach each and every individual here in every corner and crevice of this planet. So, what is a government shutdown and why does it keep happening? Okay, the government shutdown is what it means is when funding lapses. And so in this case, when we talk about when funding lapses, we're talking about where the government, where it has to pay its bills, where each and every agency that has this part where they allocate money from a budgeted perspective that goes through to each one of these departments that they have to fund. They have to fund these agencies. And how they fund these agencies is, America uses its credit card in order to, one, go out and do the things that it does, but also with revenues that are collected is how they actually go towards paying this debt. And at any rate, they have to do what they have to do in order to keep this country running. So that means that the funding has lapsed, which means that they're unable to actually fund these agencies. That is Department of Labor, that's Department of Veteran Affairs, that's the FBI, CIA, that's the Census Bureau, that's Copyright and Trademarking, USPTO. I mean, so there's several agencies, and there's an enormous amount of them throughout this country that have to be able to fund these agencies. That's not happening. And so the Anti-Deficiency Act and the civil levy opinions of 80 and 81 come into a play because with those particular acts, it is mandated. It is mandated that the government continuously, in good faith, does everything that's normal and possible in order to keep this country running from a functional perspective, they have to do everything that they are supposed to do that's through its budgetary allocations in order to keep this country running. So again, this is something that, that's been forever since, but, there's been this shortfall that we've been going through since the 80s. Another part of this is the contrast of the U.S. shutdowns with global practices, and that's comparing the U.S. to countries like Germany, South Korea, and the U.K. And so, with that being said, with the way we are supposed to run our country is supposed to be on top of it's supposed to be on top of all of these issues. These are issues that you would not normally see, because as a country, there's no way that we should be at a point that we cannot fund the government. There's no way. There is just no way. And so, there's a lot that goes into that, because we got two main political parties. We've got several, House representatives. We've got several Senate representatives. And there's just no way that we should be at this point. So, with this episode, this isn't just about politics, it's about people. And so, what that entails is that we understand the political theater that's at hand. But what we have to understand is that the politicians are playing with real people's lives. So, I mean, we have to kind of wonder, are we like game pieces on a game board? Or is this just one of those things that these people really just can't come to a meeting of the minds and do what they need to do? And I think at this point in time right now, which I think we're finding out right now, is we really need to think about each and every politician that's there in Washington, D.C., because they're just not doing their due diligence by any of the people. Because as this affects each and every last one of us, we've got to understand that this is a problem. This is a major problem. So, what I'm also going to go through is I'm going to explain to you these steps of the government shutdown process. This is from start to finish, and I want to tell you there are 9 steps, 9 of them. And so I want to be able to explain each of these to you, which is why I'm actually making sure that I'm reading these verbatim, because these are not from me. This is the government's process and how this works. Okay, now the first thing is the budget deadline approaches. So each year, Congress must pass 12 appropriation bills to fund the federal agencies for the next fiscal year starting October 1. And so what this means is from last October of 24 to now we've got October 1st of 2025 coming up, which means the new fiscal year starts as of tomorrow. This is as of tomorrow. So this is why they have to pass these appropriations bills, by midnight tonight in order to fund the government for the next year. If Congress can agree on these bills or a temporary funding measure called a continuing resolution by the deadline, funding will lapse. And so what that means is that if there's no actual meeting of the minds, there's no agreement. And now wondering, we're talking about agreements. If there's no agreement, then the government shuts down. Now, I will say this, and I don't know too much about how these folk are operating, but I can say that this is truly one of those things this time that, I can say, the effects of what would happen for me. I mean, it does not seem like something that's normal. It does not seem like something that's regular and should be happening each and every year because you have whatever you want to call a disagreement and that nobody can actually fund the government. I mean, there's like more than 300 million people on earth. Well, here in the United States, shall I say. And so, with everything that happens here in this country, which is supposed to be the leading country of the free world, that this should not be happening because we shouldn't have any issues like this when it comes to revenues. So, again, is the CR that they need to actually pass in order to just do a continuing resolution in order to continue the government as is if there's no agreement. So the number two part of this, step two, is that no deal equals shutdown triggered. So what that means, at 12:01 a.m. on October 1st, if no funding bill is signed into law, the government enters a shutdown. The Anti-Deficiency Act prohibits federal agencies from spending money without congressional approval, forcing them to halt operations. Now, what that means is that under the Anti-Deficiency Act, that means that there is no spending to happen, period, as of October 1st after midnight, on October 1st after midnight of September 30th. There should be no spending, period, for this country. None. Absolutely none. None. They cannot spend a penny if this government is shut down. So now, what that shows us is that, they put some measures in place some time ago that some people are still able to be paid. Now, when I was a federal employee, what that meant for me, since I wasn't on the executive level, that my pay would have to have been made up and backdated for the time that I was forced to miss because there's no funding of the government, which means that I have to wait to get paid, but those on the executive side are still going to get paid. Now, that's not fair, but that's what happens. But that is still a violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act. So, what that tells us is that there is a possible probability that even with this situation, that they may try and create a loop to do what they are trying to do regardless of the case, which I don't know how that works, but hey, we'll have to find out. But I just know that as of what happens in here in step two, that means that there's no spending whatsoever in the government. Step three, agencies begin shutdown protocols. The Office of Manage and Budget, which is OMB, instructs agencies to identify which programs lose funding, separate essential versus non-essential personnel, prepare reduction in force, those are RIFs, plans if the shutdown may lead to permanent job cuts. Now, again, that goes back to what I was telling you when I was a federal employee. And so when they decide which programs is going to lose funding and they separate the essential for non-essential personnel, the essential personnel are the executives. That is people that's in management and above. They're considered essential personnel, which means they are considered to still go to work. But if you're non-essential personnel and you have a report to person that you have to report to, that means you're non-essential. That means you go home. That means you sit there and you wait until they tell you you can come back to work. But when you are able to come back to work, they will actually retroact your pay and pay you for as many paychecks as you lose. Now, we don't know how long this may be, but what this says is that if you're non-essential, that means that you're just totally out. You're just totally out. So I'm not sure exactly how they can go through and they can decide who's going to be essential and who's not. Because if, according to the Anti-Deficiency Act, if there is no money, then nobody should be working. So again, we're talking about more and more violations of the law. And the last part of that is the RIFs. So when you get that letter for your RIF, it tells you that you are a non-essential personnel. You have to go home, and you get this letter, but you'll get this call or you get another letter in the mail telling you when to report back to work. Now, remember, I just said two things, and we got two things going here. Where we got the Anti-Deficiency Act, which says that there's to be no spending in the government if it's shut down because there's no funding. But you also got what they send out, and they make this differences in what can be funded, what cannot be funded, who's essential and who's non-essential. So let's just say what happens with that is you have executives and you may have one or two worker bees that get the opportunity to continue to work while everybody else have to wait in order to get paid. Okay, so step 4, federal employees are impacted. And how they are impacted is essential workers, e.g. air traffic controllers, military personnel, border agents, continue working, but they work without pay. Non-essential workers are furloughed, placed on unpaid leave. Historically, furloughed workers receive back pay once funding is restored, but this is not guaranteed. So you go back to, I got ahead of myself, but I was just telling you guys that when this occurred, when I was a federal employee, this is how it worked, and we got our pay. And so I'm sure those people will be paid, but also at the same time, the folk that they consider essential workers that are working, they're just continuously working, but they're not getting paid. So again, that doesn't make sense. That is, a violation of the Wage and Hour Division's actual law that's in place when it comes to wage and hours, which is part of 29 CFR, which is essential to the Wage and Hour Division. And so when it comes to 29 CFR and it's 850 parts plus 1,000, there are lots that goes into that where we actually would fine employers for having people to work and not paying them. But the government's doing that. Step 5, services begin to shut down. Okay, what that means is agencies suspend or scale back operations, passport processing halts, national parks and museums are closed, scientific research pauses, immigration hearings are canceled, food safety inspections and consumer protections are delayed. So what that means is if you have have applied for a passport, and if it's not processed by midnight tonight, then that means that process is going to halt, which means that your passport is going to be on hold and delayed for whenever they get back to work. The national parks and museums, they're going to close. People are not, that is us as civilians, are not allowed to go into those parks. Scientific research pauses. That is, when we're doing R&D for all these chronic diseases and illnesses and things of that nature, all of that's on pause. Immigration hearings are canceled. So those people that they have in the deportation lockdown, they're just there. There's no judge working. There's no nothing. They're sitting there until the government comes back to work. And food safety inspections and consumer protections are delayed. So if they're delayed, what that means is there's food that's probably still going to be sold that may not have been inspected, which means there's a possibility that you could have some issues with food that could do you some seriously harm. So you have to be careful when it comes to that part. So step 6 in this phase is the economic and social fallout. Shutdowns cost billions in lost productivity, delayed service, and back pay. Vulnerable communities suffer most, especially those relying on federal aid, public health services, and legal protections, and public trust erodes as political blame games intensify. So here we go with this part where we know that there's no production. So that means that there's no production because there's no workforce. That means that all of that is costing the government money, which means we as the taxpayers are going to have to make up a shortfall for something that we're not responsible for, even though we've already paid taxes into this, and this is already supposedly is handled, but we are going to be paying more for this, more, and that's not close to fair. When we talk about the vulnerable communities, we're talking about the underserved and marginalized communities. They're going to suffer most because already there's been a cut to the SNAP program. So you got senior citizens and you got those that are underserved and marginalized that can't make up shortfalls, for their cost of living already, that is going to get worse. And so primarily what this means is people are either going to go homeless, they're either going to not have food to eat. There's just going to be many things that happens when it comes to this, but there's no telling what's going to be the consequences of this. Because also when they're relying on this federal aid that they can't get, the public health services are going to shut down, and the legal protections, that is for legal aid and things of that nature, all of that stops. That all stops. So when we talk about public trust erodes as political blame games intensify, what that means is, people again are not going to be trusting politicians because, everybody's in for, it seems like they're all in for greed. So I don't know exactly what the process is with that part, but I will say this is not something that people are willing to continuously to trust, because we put these people here to work for us, but apparently they can't get the job done. They can't get the job done, and we should be thinking about what are we going to do about this, because we can't keep having this. And because you're gonna have Republicans and Democrats going back and forth in the media talking about who did what and who didn't do what and why they did this and why they didn't do this, But at the same time, I think those are things that we as the public need to sit down, look, read, and understand and make those decisions on our own. Step seven is negotiations resume. Okay, that means pressure mounts from unions, media, and constituents. Congressional leaders and the president negotiate a funding deal. Once passed and signed, agencies reopen and employees return to work. Okay, so what that means is, we would have to take time out of our wonderful days where we're thinking about being productive, where we have to take time out of our busy days, and we're actually being asked to go out and protest. We're being asked to write letters to congressmen and senators and demand action and things of that nature, that they get stuff done. Now, if we got to go through that extra process, that in itself does not seem like something that's just worth doing, because this is just a whole lot of stuff that, a lot of people are not understanding the process, why this is happening, and then what to do, which is why I'm just saying to you guys, I'm actually reading this process so you guys know exactly what happens step by step. And so the second part of step 7 is congressional leaders and the president negotiate a funding deal. Now, when they say they negotiate a funding deal, now they're actually going to have to sit down and they're going to actually have to discuss what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. Now, as this is going, when we're talking about healthcare and we're talking about the SNAP program and, just a whole bunch of other things, I don't know how that's going to play out. So, I suggest that, those of you that are Republicans and Democrats, go and call, you need to write your constituents and tell them that you want them to do what's necessary in order to make this pass. You have to do something. So that's where that step is. And the final part of step 7 is once it's passed and signed, agencies reopen and employees return to work. So when they sign that bill, once they negotiate, which means if there's no deal tonight, the government is shut down. So that means that as of tomorrow, they're going back to the negotiating table and they're going to sit down and they're going to say, I want this. And the other's going to say, I want this. And so somebody's going to have to come to a meeting of the minds. And so what you have to understand is that we got a bunch of grown people, a bunch of grown old people that's sitting up here making decisions for individuals that should not be making these decisions. So again, I think this is where we all need to be thinking about removing each and every last one of these individuals. So you make sure you go vote. So now we got step 8. And step 8 is recovery and repercussions. Agencies scramble to catch up on delayed work. Some services take weeks to resume normal operations. Long-term damage includes delayed court cases, interrupted medical research, financial strain on families, erosion of morale among public servants. So let's talk to that. Let's go to that first part about agencies scramble to catch up on delayed work. Okay, all that work that was done, that is even for those that do investigative cases. You have to leave that behind. So when they call you back to work, and let's say you got 5 cases, like I was in wage and hour, so I had to investigate companies for labor laws, right? So if I had 5 cases when we had to shut down the government, when we reopen, let's say that's a month later, but according to my standards, I get 45, 60 days to complete a case, right? So let's say we're out for 60 days. If we're out for 60 days, then that means that I've got to hit on my standards because the government shut down. Now, the only way that doesn't happen is that my direct supervisor will have to go in and have to put in an extension for me, myself, or request that I do an extension in order to keep this going on when this is not even my fault. So now this is something, again, that causes a problem in the workplace, because what that means is if I get an extension, it's no longer than 15 days. So if it's no longer than 15 days and I got a case that I haven't even started, that's going to be really next to impossible to complete either of those cases. Because if I've got 45 to 60 days to complete that case, where you got to go in and you've got to do interviews, you've got to hold initial conferences, you've got to do calculations on records, and then you have to be able to go through and do a final conference and say, hey, if there's a violation, you owe these people this amount of money, you've got to get these people to pay. So now when you go through all that, that is next to impossible if you've got 5+ cases and you got to go and you got to get those done. So that's going to be a hit on your standards regardless of the case. So again, this is the issue with being non-essential personnel, because your work gets to be triple what it is for an essential personnel. So some services take weeks to resume normal operations. So just depending upon which agency you're in and the work that's at hand, it could have you back, have that agency backed up like at least a month. I'm going to tell you, it's going to be at least a month. And so what that means is, if there's no deal tonight and they have tomorrow, which is Wednesday, October 1st, if they don't get a deal done to, let's say, Friday, which is the second, which is the third, if they don't get a deal done to the third, then that means that we're basically looking at already, let's say, we're going to be nice and say 3 days. But when you count the weekend, which you're not supposed to, but you count the weekend, that's 5 days. So when you get to next Monday, you're already a week behind. So if they get a deal done on Friday and they tell you to come back to work on Monday, which is impossible, which means they'll probably have you come back to work on Wednesday. So you still got a week out. So if you missed a whole week, the agency is back at least 3 weeks to a month. So that work is going to be hard to catch up on. And so this is the issue for the non-essential personnel, which is the gripe, which with the unions, what they have, with the different personnel. So that goes back and forth, and that's another issue. So when we talk about long-term damage, that includes, it says, delayed court cases, interrupted medical research, financial strain on families, erosion of morale among public servants. The delayed court cases, I feel sorry for the people that are going in front of immigration, because it's already hard, but now it's going to be really crazy, because now you're talking about trying to rush cases through. That's a problem. When you talk about interrupted medical research, if they are at a point, and especially it could be a major breakthrough before we had to have this shutdown, then now we're talking about having to come back and reset and reestablish all of that work all over again in order to bring it back to its place of where you can say, okay, we're at that breakthrough point. When we talk about financial strain on families not getting paid, that's a problem. And the erosion of morale among public servants, that's what I'm speaking of when I'm telling you about, the work, especially if you're doing investigative work. That's going to be an issue, because when you have to actually go back in order to start this work over again, nobody cares other than you need to get it done. But if you can't get it done, then you get a hit on your standards, which wasn't even your fault. So now you're probably going to find yourself at the union, because, when it comes to doing the evaluations on your standards and everything, believe me, those directors are going to sit there and say, well, you was late on these 5 cases. And you say, how can I be late on 5 cases when the government shut down? That's not my issue. That's yours. That's exactly what they say. So, that's a problem. So the final step in this government shutdown situation is step 9, which is calls for reform. Critics push for structural changes, automatic funding extensions like Germany and South Korea, treating budget failures as votes of no confidence like the UK, and the goal prevent shutdowns from being used as political weapons. So what they're simply saying is that when it comes to everything being okay, and we talk about calling for reform, when they're saying there's just should be a trigger to have an automatic extension where it kicks in automatically. Now, for our type of government, that would be a problem. And the reason why that would be a problem is because they would never meet, the politicians would never meet the deadline. They would never do what's necessary in order to make things right. They would never do it. I don't care if you're Republican or a Democrat. They would never do that. And they're not going to do that. Because if they did that, then they would always abuse that. So they can't push something in there as a trigger as an automatic extension. And when they say treating budget failures as votes of no confidence, like in the UK, let me just tell you like this. You see, we know what happened with the UK when they did Brexit. So we knowing that, it's still a different kind of thing, even though everything is via parliamentary procedures. Their parliamentary procedures is a little bit different in the extent of what we do here in America. So, I guess there's a likeness, but that likeness cannot be real. And the goal to prevent shutdowns from being used as political weapons would be finding people that really want to work together for the benefit of people. That's the only way they're going to shut that down. So, what I want you guys to understand for the key takeaways to this process of when we're talking about the government shutdown is the shutdowns are not accidents. They're the result of failed leadership and political brinksmanship, which means that they knew this a while ago. And, to try and prove a point, you've got one part of the government that's saying this is not right. And you got this part of the government saying we're in control so we can do what we like. And so, again, you got that tugging. So this is what's going on from both sides. And so what has to happen is in order, and it sounds like that because there's been this roughshod of running over the government, it seems like one side is saying we're not going to continue that. And so if that's the case, I can understand that. But still, we should have been way prepared for this. We should have been well on top of this in order for this to be prevented. So again, this is something that the politicians are doing that's causing problems amongst us, the civilians out here that have got nothing to do with that. And people are putting blame. They're putting blame on other folk, which does not make sense. Because all of us out here in the public have nothing to do with what they're doing in Washington, D.C. We have nothing to do with that. But, when people want to take it personal that way, and they say, okay, well, this is what's going on, and this is why this is happening, we can't possibly say that, okay, well, this party did this, so they're the reason for doing this. This party did this, so they're the reason why this happened. And so while we still got all this yapping going on from both of these sides, underneath here are us, the people. And so us, the people down here, are griping for no reason. For no reason. None of us have any part in that. None of us. That's these people that's doing this that we need to vote out of office. Think about that. Let's get those people out of there. The second thing to this key takeaway is the impact is real. That is, families, veterans, and communities suffer. So I want you to think about this. If we're talking about families and we're talking about veterans and communities, that's all communal. That's all communal. That's us, the public in general. That's us, the public. Because veterans are a part of the public as well as communities, as well as the everyday people that make up those communities. So we're all suffering. We're all suffering. And it's not because of us. It's not because of us. Civic engagement matters. That's voting, advocacy, and public pressure can shift outcomes. Now, yes, that can happen, but that's a lot of work because now you got to go and organize, and you have to think about it. If this is going to happen tonight where there is, let's say there's no agreement, how long is it going to take you to organize in order to get folk up to DC, make all these signs and protest and scream out your representatives' names. I'm going to tell you this way to make it simple for you. If you got an Android phone or if you've got an iPhone, go to your Play Store. There is an app that's called the Congress app. Under that app, when you put that in your phone, download and put it in your phone, it updates continuously. You will have the name of not just your representatives from both the Congress and the Senate, but every last congressional individual, as well as every senatorial person. You will get their name, you will get their email address, and you will get their phone number. That's both in DC as well as where they are in the state. Now, to make that easy for you, you can use that. And look, call them, send them emails. Send them emails and make sure they know that you're upset. Send them the emails. But I will tell you, I think to try to organize folk to go to Washington, D.C. is probably going to take you months to get that organized. So, I mean, but it's worth a try. Anything's worth a try. When we talk about advocacy groups can help. But again, if there's not one already formed, then you're talking about it's going to take some time to get that group together. And the public pressure is when we're talking about, either going out and protesting or sending the emails and the phone calls. Either way, put the pressure on if that's what you feel like you need to do. And the last takeaway is we must rethink how we fund government to protect people, not just policies, okay? Or not just politics. And so let me just tell you what that means, is that we need to make sure that we got people that's passing real legislation. Because if these people are not passing real legislation, then why? Why must we give up our time in order to continuously put pressure on these people that are supposed to be here to do the job that we sent them here to do? Now, that don't make sense. Of course, it would never make sense. But the whole thing about that is, they're not caring about that. And see, this is why I think, we know that we should have what they call term limits, but I'm going to tell you this. I honestly think that, going through that process is going to be just as strenuous. But I think that if people are really going to do what's necessary, then I think people should actually vote their better interest and stop voting party lines. Stop voting party lines, because I just don't understand, the real problem solving when it comes to that, because that's just not going to get it. And so let's go back to, let's talk about how we got here. Okay. And we're gonna call this the road to the brink. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the budget process and continue the CR, which is continuing resolution. I'm going to talk about the political gridlock, the role of the OMB, which is Office of Management and Budget, and also the historical context of the shutdown since the 1980s. The longest was 2018 to 2019. Okay, and actually, with that one, I stopped working with the federal government in 2018, November 2018, as a matter of fact. So when we're talking about this budgeting process, and we knowing, as I went through in the beginning of step one, of what's supposed to happen, we know that they're supposed to pass this budget that's going to fund all of these agencies for a year. Okay? But, instead of just doing the budget that's for a year, and we know that this is how this is going to just be longevity for people's livelihoods and, making things a little bit easier for everyone. Well, the way it looks like the way these politicians are doing this is there's just gamesmanship in general. And so I don't know this. I'm just kind of like trying to figure through this whole process, even after being a part of this as a government service employee. And so, it's like there's just the gamesmanship. And what the gamesmanship does is it says, okay, if let's say this side decides that it wants to fund the government, just forever. And you got this side that says, no, I only want to fund the government for 6 months. So now we've got this going on again. So as this is going on, and I want you to just think about this, and I'm giving you this visual, is that when you see that and you see like they're talking long term, they're talking short term. So how do you get these folk to come to a meeting of the minds? And so when you think of long term, most people say that sounds much better because we're talking about the funding will continue. But 6 months, they say no because we only have to think here in the now. So thinking here in the now, how does that work when it goes into the future? Now, when you talk about going into the future, how can you say forever because you don't know what that's going to be like? So it would make sense that if they both talked, that they could talk about 5 years at least and agree on that, right? That would be very simplified, because this is what a politician should be thinking about. This is how they should be thinking. Because if they're thinking of funding the government, let's not be kicking cans and kicking this can forever. Well, we've been kicking this can for like 30 years, ever since 2018 or before 2018, 1980s. I'm sorry. It's ever since the 1980s that they've been doing this. So if that's the case, why do we have to do that? And see, when we're talking about, either doing a budget or we want to talk about a CR is not going to do anything because, again, that's a short-term solution. Those kind of short-term solutions is what's causing the budgeting constraints to continue to be what they are, because that means that, when there's anything that has to be extra, that has to be passed through the Congress, then that means that, you're going and now you're allocating money that you really don't have. So if you're allocating money that you don't have, how in the hell do you expect, people to say, okay, well, we've got the government under control? No, you can't possibly do that. And so, people look at that many different ways. And so I'm just giving you the example because for me, I don't have a dog in that fight. I don't have a dog in that fight. But I just want to give you the example as to what they're doing and why they're doing this. Because while they're doing this and they're jawing, the people that's underneath, which is us, are sitting here. And for those that are more involved in politics, we're actually arguing and fighting with each other when we shouldn't even be doing that. Because that's not about us. We have nothing to do with that. What we should be doing is we should be working together to vote these people out of office. So I don't think it's too hard to say work together and vote people out as it is to say, let me sit here and let me listen to what these folk are doing, and they're putting out this propaganda to their sides. They're both putting out propaganda. And so the propaganda is like, as this cools down, and here you go. This is the people down here, which is us. This is where it goes. And so now you got clashes and collisions that are not necessary. It's not necessary. So when we talk about the political gridlock, we talk about the House versus the Senate and party line votes and lack of compromise. So when we talk about the House versus Senate, the way it normally goes, because the House is control of the purse strings. So that's all your Congress people. The Senate does the big business and put all of the executive types into their positions, but they also have to overlook legislation before it's passed to give that final word. So let's say the House does its bill. The bill gets passed through the House because they have to have a vote on it. So as that bill passes, then it goes over to the Senate for approval. Once it gets into the Senate and you got, 100 senators over there, they put it into committee. They vote on the bill. And if they decide they like the bill, but they want some changes in the bill, they send it back to the House. They send it back to the House. The House votes on the changes and make the changes. They get together and they make a compromise. So once they finish and they redo the bill, once it's passed again in the House, they send it to the Senate. So it goes to the Senate. And so the Senate agrees with the changes. They put the stamp of approval, which is from the Senate majority leader, along with the Senate minority leader who grants the approval and so forth. But the Senate majority leader is the one that's going to sign off on and say, okay, good to go, send it back. They sign it, they send it back. So when they send it back to the House gets the bill. And when they get the bill, they do their little final ties on it, not adding any amendments, but they do their final ties on it. They send it to the president, and the president signs the bill. It becomes law. So now, but what you got to remember is the president only have so many days once they send it to him and put it on his desk to sign that bill into law. Because if it's not done by a particular number of days, then that means that it's spoiled and it's null and void. It's not going to be passed. Now, sometimes they try to go back and retroact bills and come up with excuses and lies and so forth and sign things in a way, but they put the date that it should have been signed on a lot of bills, but that's not how that's supposed to go, but that's what happens. And so that's how that process goes, Senate versus House. And so, like I said, the House is the one that controls the purse strings. So if the House is controlling the purse strings, then that means that the president does not have the authority to spend any of this extra money as far as the House is concerned, because the House controls the checkbook. So they do not have to grant him authority to spend any money. If they say, no, you can't spend no money, he can't spend no money. So, and if that ties his hand, oh well. But if they say, okay, yeah, you can spend this money, then oh well. So that's how that process goes. The House controls the purse strings. They're the ones that should have the budgets together. They're the ones that should be funding all of the agencies. They are the ones that should come up with what those budgets should be years in advance. Years in advance. So in other words, if you got you're having midterms next year, and in the House there's only 2 years, right? So if there's only 2 years in the House, then what that means is that within those 2 years that you've been in the House, you guys should have actually been working on budgets that should be going for at least out, let's say next year is 26. You guys should have budgets done for 2031. They should already be done. So if they're not done, then that's telling you that these people are not working. And the reason why they're not working is because they're working on other business that's non-essential, which means it's not things that's going to help people like yourself, me, and all the other folk. They're not trying to help us. That's what it looks like to me. So everybody has their take. So when we talk about party line votes, some people say I'm Republican, and these people say I'm Democrat. And so it does not matter. I'm voting Republican. I'm voting Democrat. Okay? So if that's how you vote, that's how you vote. But I would think that people should start paying attention to agendas before voting for people. I think you should start paying close attention to agendas. And like I told you, to get that app that's called the Congress app, download that app. Download that app. You can see each and every bill that your congressional and senatorial candidate or representative has voted on. The voting record is on there for as long as they've been there in the Senate or the House. You can see what they voted on, and you know if that was something that you liked or disliked. And if that's the case, then you're more than allowed to send them that email and ask the question, why did you vote on this bill? This is also how you guys can put in that application to do the tour of the White House. It's all on that congressional app. Very easy, very simple. Very easy, very simple. Keep up with what these politicians are doing because, when you see those bills and any amendment that's been put on the bill, you actually see it there on that voting app. When they vote for the bills, you get to see who voted for it, but you also get to see all the amendments that was added to the bill. Everything that was added. That allows you to ask your representative, why are you voting for something that's spending this much more money, and why did it have to be an amendment? Simple question. You get the simple answer, but it don't be a simple answer. Of course, you're going to get the political answer. So I just want you to understand that. So, and the last thing is the lack of compromise. It's because there's not going to be a compromise. The compromise is you. That is, when I say you, that means like me as well. We the people. We're the compromise. And the reason why we're the compromise, and the part that they want us to play in this, is they want us to fight. They want us to fight. They want us to fight. We don't need to be doing that. We do not need to be doing that. We need to be voting these folk about an office. We need to be voting these people about an office, because if we got to go through this every year, this is stressful. This is causing folk that are veterans, it's causing PTSD flare-ups. It's causing people to panic because people don't know if they're going to have checks, or if they're going to have work to do, or how this is going to affect them, and what are going to be the effects, because we don't know how long this is going to be. This is what they're causing for each and every individual that's sitting out here looking at this, and looking at this because they don't give a care. So if they don't give a care, then you need to show them that you give a care, because they don't need your vote. Stop listening to the political bull crap, because they're giving you all this crap where these sides are blaming each other. They're blaming each other. So while they're doing that, is that really necessary? No, it's not. Because it's not necessary, because you sent them there to do a job. You sent them there to do what's necessary to take care of you. Not to get there and do political bullpucking, and then whatever else they're doing that they shouldn't be doing, but they're doing it, and they're doing it at our expense. But we're the ones that's fighting. Now, let's make that make sense. Why are we fighting? We didn't do this. We're not trying to do this. We're trying to live our everyday lives. We're out here working. We're doing whatever is necessary to keep our families fed and make everybody happy. But we're out here fighting. We're fighting a political fight and not the politicians. Now, let's make that make sense. They're not making that make sense. They're just sending out some stuff to trigger folk. They just want to trigger folk. So as they trigger folk, then these folks going to be on these triggers, and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. We don't need to be doing that. We do not need to be doing that. So the role of the Office of Management Budget and Policy Alignments, OMB, is what it's called. So when OMB does everything, because OMB is like HR, and so what it does is it oversees everything that happens for each and every last one of these agencies. So when it comes to the funding part and what has to happen with all the personnel and so forth, because I mean, there's like maybe over 1 million federal employees. And so with all of that, I mean, and OMB is in like, they have districts and so forth, you know? And so their main, I want to say that, well, their main place is there in DC as well. But they have large regional office that actually handles regions. And so I think one of the regional offices is here in Atlanta. I know one is in California, but I'm not sure if there's one in like New York or maybe in some part of the Midwest. But they have large offices that handle regions as well, because that's a lot of people that they have to keep up with. And so, you know, my hat goes off to the work that they do. They try to do it proficiently, but it's difficult. And especially at times like this is very difficult because for them, they don't have any non essential personnel. All of their personnel is essential because if they got to handle a government shutdown, just imagine the agencies and the department heads in the many parts of this country and out of the country that they've got to manage. That's a lot of people. So, you know, that's a lot. So we talk about the historical context. Shutdowns ever since 1980s. The longest was in 2018, 2019. Now, let me tell you that longest shutdown that they're talking about in 2018, 2019. This is where, you know, when that happened, there were a lot of people that actually had got to the point that when they couldn't get a check, a lot of them went and they filed for unemployment. Now, I want you to think about this because you know you're thinking you're doing the right thing, but you're not. And so I'm just going to use an example. I'm not, you know, not calling no names, whatever have you, but like I'm here in the Metro Atlanta area, and so there was a lot of people that were federal employees that, you know, because they were off work for so long, they went and they filed for unemployment. Well, after they got a few of those checks and, you know, lo and behold, you know, had to go back to work, you know, what wound up happening is that those people had to repay. They had to repay, you know, the unemployment compensation back to the state of Georgia. They had to pay that back. So I want you to think about this, especially if you're one of the higher ranked employees inside the federal government. Please don't run and do that because that's something that could cause you some major problems. Because when you got to pay that money back, if you have to pay it back, a lot of times they're not lenient to where they say they give you time to do that. So I just want you to be mindful of that as well, because that did happen. That happened. And that was not a good thing either because, you know, people were trying to survive and they were trying to do what was necessary because you couldn't go and get another job because you weren't allowed to. And if you went and got another job and they found out about it because it was not approved, then you're being disciplined in a different way. So again, it's a catch 22, a serious catch 22. So from all of this, shutdowns became the norm only after the early 80s. Before then, agencies kept working even if limited. So just think about that. There were still functionalities then because, you know, the government was functional where they realized that they could not affect people like you and I, you know, to the extent that they were causing these real serious hardships. It just didn't make sense. So why would they do that? So when I say why would they do that, they did that during those times They did that because they refused to let the public, let all of us out here in the community just suffer and not have any kind of means whatsoever. But there came a particular time, when that changed. And when that changed, it was not a good thing because those are the same things that we're running on now. We're running on those right now. And that's what's actually messing with people right now. Let me check and see if there's any if there's an update here on um, on this situation here. Okay, they're actually starting the shutdown plan. Um, okay, they're starting the shutdown process now. So nothing's official yet until midnight, but um, so I think what's going to happen is it looks like things might not be in full effect. So let's talk about who will be affected. And so well in this part, what we're going to talk about is the faces behind the furloughs. Um, we're gonna I want to talk to you guys about the federal employees, the veterans, impact on passport services, and the emotional and financial toll on families. So, with the federal employees, the furloughs versus essential workers, and working is unpaid. I mean, that's kind of like unheard of. And for a lot of people that has not been in the federal system, it's one of those things that you just wouldn't imagine happening, but it does. And so, what that kind of like means is that when we're talking about the people that's been furloughed, those are the non-essential personnel, and again, it's called a RIF. And so, when you've been riffed, and they give you this official document, which actually comes from OMB, they give you this RIF. When you get this RIF document and you read it, it gives you a guesstimated date, is what it does. It gives you a guesstimated date of when your furlough is. And so when they try to get all of this, they try to get this from the executive branch as best as possible because you have a time frame and you always say it's to this date, but not limited to, not more than. And so what that does is that gives you that time. But if it goes past that time that's on that letter, then you get another letter that's continuing your furlough. And so when they're doing that furlough, the furlough is not it's not a nice thing because being considered non-essential, as I think about that, now, that actually sounds really horrible because what that says is you're replaceable, but still in all, that's one of those things to where you say, well, um, are you good enough to do the job primarily? Because that shouldn't be, because you have to go through so much in order to get one of these jobs. But at any rate, when I say furloughs versus essential personnel, the thing is, even though the essential personnel that they keep that are still working, but they're not being paid, the question that you always ask is, what kind of work are they doing that they're considered essential personnel? Because when you're in normal situations and you need something done, it's very hard to get these folk to come and do um, anything that you need them to do or to look over whatever you need them to look over. and ask questions because it's just kind of difficult. So, it makes you wonder, what are they doing when nobody else is there? So, that's a crazy thing for one point. But the whole thing about that is, supposedly when they're not being paid, that's not, I'm not sure if that's really true or not. I'm not sure if that's really true or not. So I'll just put it like that because I'm not sure. But I don't know anybody that works for free. So, but if that's the case, then that's their thing. Um, when we're talking about veterans, caregivers, law enforcement, and community servants. Now, when we're talking about these faces behind the furloughs. Now, when we talk about these people and think about what the work that they do actually should be considered essential, but it's considered non-essential, and they're off. How do they make that determination? Is a good question, because what that primarily says, unless you're at you're in a dire need of stress, and you know it really gets beyond what they think it's going to be just basic, then now you're calling um, in some reinforcements from wherever that's going to make up a shortfall to take care of a situation that has gotten out of hand. So I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I will say that as long as they're doing that, then they have to think about, what is it that they're going to be able to do that's going to say, hey, I'm doing this because this is what I was told to do, and this is how I know how to do it. That doesn't make it right. So, in other words, again, what is it that they're doing when nobody else is there? That's kind of crazy. But the main people are the people that's not there, is the way I look at it. Um, when we talk about the impact on the passport services, food safety, immigration hearings, and scientific research. Now, these are things that put the government behind the eight ball, and it puts the government behind the eight ball because if they're going to do what they're supposed to do, then that's what they should be doing, and they need to stop trying to just make people think one thing or the other, because that's not the way this is supposed to work. And so it gets to that point that it makes people wonder. I mean, like, or people getting some kind of benefit from the people that are being chosen to be what they call essential personnel, or how is that really working? Because there's no real system there to do that. So this is like based on directors, assistant directors, or whomever, as to who they want to consider to be essential and non-essential. So again, we're talking about something else that's a problem that needs to be fixed. And we're talking about the emotional and financial toll on families. With the financial toll on families, again, this gets to be really horrible because people have to do what's necessary in order to survive. So when people need to survive, I don't know too many people that, oh, excuse me. I don't know too many people that's not going to do what's necessary in order to take care of their family and feed their children. So, that's putting people at odds and putting them in horrible situations. So, my key notes to this is that federal employees are not bargaining chips. They deserve stability and respect, not pink slips and political games. That's well put, that's well said, and that's just what that is. Because again, there's nothing that quantifies or qualifies who's essential or non essential. Nothing. But If the system is supposed to be what it's supposed to be, then that means that there should be a negotiated contract via the union that would actually stabilize this whole thing and take all of that other stuff out the game where it's just not relevant because it's not supposed to be that way. But, I tell you like this, we've seen stranger things before, but, I hope that when it comes down to this, that, we will actually be at a point at some place or another that we won't have to keep doing this. At least I hope so. Because as this is happening all the time, I think this is also one of those times that, for all the individuals out there, this is where you guys are going to have to start planning. You're going to have to start planning because you do not know. When you have the unknown is the unknown. So that means that when you think about each and every possible crazy situation that can go on, let's say we go over into January and you need to start planning for the whole year. One, you need to start budgeting and saving money. Two, for all your perishables, food items, and things of that nature, you need to stock. And the third thing is you need to have yourself at what we call, when I was in the military, we want to call it readiness. Because when you're at ready, there's nothing that you're not prepared for, and you can move at any given time and do what's necessary in order to keep yourself moving. Because, I'm not going to say that people take situations like this for granted, but I will say that what people are doing is, people are waiting until something like this happens and then they see what has transpired, but they're not taking it serious enough to say that I've learned from that situation. What you guys should be learning from situations like this is you need to go and you need to start placing. I don't know if you want, however you like to call yourself saving money. I mean, that if you put money in banks, that banks are not giving you returns on investment. But, however you need to start putting money or where you need to put money, you need to start, paying yourself. You need to start paying yourself, and you need to pay yourself first. When it's time to stock up, you need to stock up on perishables and foods that you know that you and your family like. You need to do that regardless of the case. It does not matter if there's nothing at hand. You need to stock up. Plain and simple. There ain't no other way around it. You need to stock up. Because, if they're going to keep doing this, I think it's time for us as a general public. One, if we can't vote them all out, we need to keep trying to do that. But we also need to have ourselves prepared and ready for situations like this. So I want to talk about the ripple effects in real time. And the ripple effects in real time is how people will be affected. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about delays in Social Security applications, VA benefits, and federal courts. Now, these are the big things that, that really matter most to people because each of those categories represents an enormous amount of people out here. So when we talk about delays in Social Security applications, if you filed the application for Social Security and the government shuts down tonight or this morning, then what that says is your application is going to remain in place, one, until they get back, but it stays in the order in which it came in. And so if it was already far in the line, then you can just imagine what that's going to be like, especially with the agency being backed up. So it's going to be a while before your application's even looked at. And we talk about the VA benefits. Now, the VA benefits, now what they can do with those, and it just depends, again, because, um, you've got, folk that are making decisions that, that's kind of new or a new norm of doing things. But what will happen is they can make an exception to this to where VA benefits continue. Now, I want you to think about this. When we talk about the VA, we're talking about people that did not, people that did not um, get, well, they have to get their benefits, from when it's service compensation. And with that, they'll put it to where, ooh, excuse me, somebody signs off and say, hey, well, these people need to continue to get their monthly checks regardless of the case. They can even do that with Social Security, where they can keep that running. How they do that, I don't know, but there's a discretionary situation when it comes to that. And so, uh, and I'm sure that in order to not have the veterans complaining, that they'll do something about that to make that right. With the federal courts, the federal courts are normally shut down, period, because nobody's in any of the buildings. All the offices are closed except for security. Now, the security that's there, which is considered essential personnel, they're there to ensure that nothing evades or come into that building that's not supposed to be there. They do that and they stay on top of that. Now, it's kind of rough, but yeah, they still have to do the rounds and everything else, but they're doing their jobs. When we talk about the closure of the national parks, museums, and the cultural institutions. Now, we have national parks all over the country. We've got museums all over the country. But the majority of the federal uh, national parks and museums are in Washington, D.C. So we're talking about places like the Smithsonian. We're talking about the King Memorial. Um, we're talking about the Black History Museum. Um, we're talking about all of those good places that have gotten frequent visits from primarily every individual around this country. Everyone is going to see that to see exhibits there. So even after seeing the exhibits and they're closing it down, it's kind of rough because when people need to have a little culture in their life, that's not going to be a part of it because you're not going to be able to do it. But when they shut down those national parks, you also cannot visit the national parks. And when they put that you can't enter or whatever have you, that's out there in the front of them. Don't go in. The disruption of weather forecasting, transportation security, and military pay. Now, they have these weather systems. They have the weather guessers there that do their job. And weather guessing, believe it or not, weather guessers are actually considered essential personnel. So unless you're like a worker bee under the weather guesser, then you're non-essential. But you know, they actually try to keep that weather thing going because it's important to the functionality of the government. And the transportation security and military pay, when we talk about those, is the transportation pay, is not just like big rig trucks, which people think of, because there's many forms of transportation, because you got importing, exporting. That's also considered transportation. So with all these different parts, what's happening is, they're actually just functioning. But it has to slow down an enormous amount, especially at this time, because not everybody's going to be able to stick in. Not everybody's going to be able to hold on. So they send you home. Just make sure you keep up with your letter and make sure you answer your phone. And economic cost. $11 billion was lost in the 2018-2019 shutdown. Now, let me just tell you about that. $11 billion. Because I left, I resigned November 18th, 2018. I remember that day. I resigned. So, in the process of resigning that day, it was that December that they had the government shutdown. That one I missed. That one I missed. But I was in two of them. I was in the one in 95 and I was in the first one under Obama. But this one in 2018, 2019, I missed this one. And I will tell you that I left November, the shutdown was December. And when they did that, they went over into the next year. And that was a lot of teeter totter there. As a matter of fact, um, the occupant of the White House now was the occupant then. That was the occupant then. Wait a minute. Was he the occupant then? Wait a minute. Let me make sure I get that right. Um, no, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. It was after him. It was after him. I can't remember who was in there after him, but it was the person after him. And when that took place, it was second to none. It was second to none. And what I remember most about that, because I watched it on the television on the news, is that again the parties were doing this. They were at each other, and they were at each other harshly. It was so harsh that this was a shutdown that I think took place like maybe 2, 3 months. And this is when the story I was telling you about the people here in Georgia that were federal employees that went to file for unemployment and was getting those checks had to pay them back. It's because they didn't expect, they didn't anticipate this being more than a month, but it went on for like 2, 3 months. It did. And with that, that was a big, big problem. And so, people were looking to try to survive as best as possible. But, again, one of those things is two wrongs don't make a right. Two wrongs definitely doesn't make a right. But, you got to be careful with those things, because what winds up happening is in what you're doing and trying to survive, are some things that can come back to you and cause you major, major, major harm. And so the keynotes from what I just went over is shutdowns don't just freeze the government, they fracture lives. And so what that means is basically just as I was just saying, is that is that because the government's out of play and you work for the government, you being non-essential are hurt by this situation. So if you're hurt by this situation, what can you do other than sit there and wait and hope that it ends soon because you really need your job in order to provide for your family? You need this to provide for your family. But you got these people in Washington, D.C. playing politics. They're playing politics with all these lives. That includes each of us that's on this live right now. They're playing with our lives. And some people still refuse to vote a lot of these people out of office, which is actually hindering. It's hindering the growth of the country. It's not helping. And the hindrance is at a point that is just totally oblivious. We can't possibly sit here and say that we're enjoying this whole process because there's nothing good about this process. This process is about as horrible as it gets, and they're going to continue to make it that way. We have to do better as a people. We have to do better. We've got to get these people out. We got to get these people out. And we all have to come up with better ways of vetting the candidates that we vote for, because I'm telling you, a lot of these folks that are going here into these offices, they're there and they're going under the radar because they're like staying here in what they have been calling safe districts. And in these safe districts, people are just voting these people in because of their name. They're not working, they're not doing anything for these communities, their constituents at all, but they get that free pass. That's the horrible part. So let's talk about what should you guys do. Okay, this is preparing for the pause. Okay, so when you're preparing for the pause, if you're a federal employee, you need to know your furlough rights and document everything. If you rely on federal services, expect delays, seek local support networks and financial planning, emergency savings, community aid, advocacy groups, and mental health. Acknowledge stress, seek support, and stay informed. So when we're talking about if you're a federal employee and you know your furlough rights and document everything, again, that goes back to what I was telling you about when they send you that letter. When they send you that letter or they hand you that letter in your hand, you need to make sure you keep that letter, because, times are much different now than they were then. Because then, they had a track of all those things regardless of the case. But, you never know in these times now, if you lose that document, if the government is shutting down, if you lose that document and you need to have that document to report back to work and you don't have it, they might not bring you back. And let it be known that the onus is on you, because you need to prove that you was working here. Not because I see your face and I know you. You need to give me your proof. Just saying. Just saying. So, in knowing your rights, you definitely need to keep up with however many letters that you're sent, and anything that goes on outside of that. Like, let's say, like I was saying to you earlier, if somebody needs to get a job, you have to call OMB or send OMB a letter and request the chance of looking for another job, because you've got to work and you've got to put food on the table for your family. They have to approve that. You can't just go and start working somewhere, because if that's found out and nobody approved it, you're going to get fired. You are going to get fired. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. You, especially being non-essential, you have got to keep the best paper trail. You got to keep the best paper trail. And believe me when I tell you that. Because if you don't, then they'll tell you, oh, you didn't do your due diligence. And because you didn't do your due diligence, then, they have the right to tell you that now you no longer work here. Until you no longer work here. And so that's not a nice thing, but that's what happens. If you rely on federal services, expect delays and seek local support networks. Okay, so that means that if you're relying on SNAP and some other programs to help you with foods and so forth, simply you need to go to like maybe some shelters or whatever have you, some food pantries and things of that nature. And you need to start seeking some help from those places to help you when it comes to just getting the necessary foods that you need in order to feed your family. When we talk about financial planning, As I was saying earlier, learn to save money, where you want to save money, and how you want to save money. But you need to have emergency savings in place. And so, in doing that, you can go to places that do community aid that can help you out. Go to some advocacy groups that can help you out. This is just to make sure that for all the essentials that you need, you're going to need to go through those things. I mean, I myself, I can't tell you, just how bad this is, but I can tell you that this is totally, totally horrible. This is horrible for all of us. And I hope that people can realize this sooner rather than later, that no matter how this turns out, we're going to have to do a lot of things together. That's all of us. We have to do a lot of things together, because if we don't do what's necessary in order to keep us all afloat, then there's no telling what the consequences are going to be like for any of us. We don't know what that's going to be like. I mean, I don't wish that for nobody. I wish only the best for folk, but hey, things happen and they happen for a reason, and a lot of times they are the wrong reason. And when we talk about your mental health, because I can tell you that this causes a lot of stress, especially on men. And when you are feeling stressed, acknowledge it. Acknowledge it. You're still going to be able to use some form of what you have under your healthcare plan, to where if you need to go and seek therapy/counseling, go do it. Acknowledge that you need it, because you can feel yourself slipping if that's the case. Therapy is good for a lot of people. I know it's good for me, because I've been to therapy service several times and I actually enjoyed it more than you can ever imagine. Because, sometimes when your rationale gets off a little bit, make sure you keep yourself going. So you guys need to seek support and stay informed, especially if it gets to the point that you feel like your mental health is taking a toll, because that's not a good thing when something like that happens. So, for this, this is a call to action. And don't wait for clarity. Prepare for the uncertainty. Let me say that again. Do not wait for the clarity. Prepare for the uncertainty. So that means you need to start preparing for how long or however you think this is going to be, which you cannot plan for that. But what that means is you need to plan as though if the uncertainty is going to be forever. Because this is where you're going to need to learn how to stop and how to keep your supplies always at ready. You have to learn to keep your supplies at ready. Don't sit there and wait for something to happen to then say, oh, I got to get this. Plan right now. Plan for the uncertainty. The unknown is always the unknown. And there's a reason why it's called the unknown, because you never know when it's going to pop up. So, if you got your essentials, that is, you got food, water, and shelter. You've got savings. And you have your family that's in place to keep your sanity and keep your mental together. You've got those three things, you're set. Because everything else outside of that is extra, but those are the things that you do in order to keep yourself moving, functioning, and always critically thinking. Again, don't wait for clarity. Prepare for the uncertainty. Prepare for the uncertainty. We don't know how long this is going to be if this government shuts down. So just be prepared. So what's next? Beyond the shutdown, accountability and action. We're going to talk about what Congress must do to restore funding, the role of compromise and public pressure, long-term reform, should the U.S. adopt automatic funding like other nations, and how viewers can advocate, contact representatives, support unions, and share stories. Okay, what Congress must do to restore funding is they need to, get their grown folk on and do what people sent them there to do, because they're going to have to negotiate to make this thing right. We know they're going to have to do this. And that I can tell you this, when they do and if they do negotiate what they think is something that's going to be good, I can guarantee you there's going to be something that you or somebody else is not going to like. So everybody's not going to get what they're supposed to get or what they want, but you're going to get something. So that something, have you at the point you say, well, is that something that I like? And so we can't think about if it's what you like. And regardless of the case, if you like it or not, if they agree to it, then that's what's going to happen. Which is why you have to prepare for the uncertainty. You've got to prepare for that, because you're not a thought in any of these people's eyes. And these politicians that run all over the place and run all up in the church and all in the communities, lying to people, talking about, oh, we love you and this is what I'm here for and this is what I'm going to do. And they get to Washington, D.C. and they turn their back on you. You got to vet them a whole lot better. Vet them a whole lot better. What role of compromise and public pressure? Well, the role of compromise and public pressure. Now, this is where, just to get the government going again, people are going to have to start compromising. That means even us out here, the regular folk, okay? We got to start compromising, but also we're going to put some public pressure on them. And so when we compromise, that means that, okay, they compromise to accept this bill and, okay, you just have to accept it. But your public pressure should be, again, download that Congress app. Start sending them emails, calling them phones. They're on the app. I promise you they're on the app. I've had this app down for the last 10 to 12 years. And the people that I saved in my favorites, I followed them for one reason. And that is, where they're located, but also what are they doing that actually helps and affect the area in which I live. That is both from the House as well as the Senate, because we've got two separate senators in each state, right? And in this case, like here in the Georgia area, you got one that's north, one that's south. It's supposed what they handle, even though they work with the whole state. So in other words, when we talk about, what they have to bring, what we hope that they bring to where we live, then you got to wonder, have they ever came to your area? Have they? You can't answer that question, right? Because you don't know. So that means that if you can't answer that question, that means most likely they didn't. And if they did, this is something else that you all need to think about. Is when they have those meetings, those town halls that people see all on the news. I want you to know those people that go to the town halls, they pay to go to those town halls. Yes, your representative is charging people to come to those town halls unless there's something particular about it. So I just leave it like that. Unless there's something particular about it. And if there's something particular about it, they're not going to tell you that they're holding that town hall. So again, this is something for you to reach out to them and voice your concerns if you're concerned about that. Long-term reform. Should the U.S. adopt automatic funding like other nations? The answer to that question is no. In my opinion, I say no. And the reason why they shouldn't do that is because if that's the case, then we would never have a budget. And if we would never have a budget, that means that spending is already at a level that you cannot imagine. So if we didn't have a budget and it just automatically renewed, what do you think would happen to the country? We would definitely be one of those underserved countries if that was the case, because there's no accountability. There's no accountability. And so, for you guys that are watching this show, I want to tell you how you can advocate. I want you to contact your representative. I want you to support unions and share your stories. Now, when I say contact your representative, remember I already told you to download that Congress app on your phone because it's got all their essential information in it. And when you download that, I'm telling you instantaneously, send them an email or call them because you want them to know how you feel. You want them to know how you feel. But, I want you to support the unions and I want you to share your story because if you've got a story that this turns out to be something that affects you from going on for more than a week, 2 weeks, and it's affecting you in the wrong way, I'm going to tell you right now, if the government shuts down as of midnight tonight, I need you to start making a video diary. You can do it on your phone. You can do it on your computer. If you do it on your computer, then you know it's going to be stored where you can go to it and you can put it in a folder. But every day that you make a diary, a video diary, talking about the government is shut down, the effects, how you're feeling, what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, and how this is causing you major issues and so forth, document that. Document it. You need to document that because what that's going to tell this person that's representing you up in Washington D.C. that they're more than causing you stress, but you need to let them know also what you're going to do about what they did that caused you to feel that way, and let them know that you want to vote them out of office. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Tell them I want you out of office. So just on this reflection, this is what I want you guys to know. Shutdowns are not inevitable. They're choices. And choices can be changed. Again, shutdowns are not inevitable. They're choices. And choices can be changed. So what I just said to you is that shutdowns can happen, but they happen because of the choices that these people make. These people are the changes that we're talking about, which means we need to vote them out of office. Vote them out. Vote them out. Choices can be changed. Yeah. So you change your mind on those representatives. That's both the House and the Senate. Get them out. Get them out. Because what's important to you is what you want this candidate to know what's important to you. And they need to be coming to you. You don't need to have to all the time go chase them down and around the world and find out where they at, where they dancing at, where they speaking at, and so forth. You're a constituent. They need to be courting all constituents. They need to be courting all constituents. So what happens is when they go into particular pockets, I want you to know how they go into those pockets, which is something else I want to tell you guys. I want you guys to start going to the census website. Okay? It's open 24/7 every day. But you got to register to be on their website and to have access to this updated information in which they got, because the technology is just unbelievable. You can delve down into every community around this country, especially in your zip code. You can actually find the pockets of the folk that are there, and you can find, how the political scope look, how the ethnicity group look, what's the total population, what's the markers as to like the borders. Um, I mean, the data is just unbelievable. And, I actually applaud the census because I actually attend a lot of their seminars or webinars. And I'm going to tell you, start registering for that because the information that they're putting out is darn important when it comes to all communities and when it comes to all facets of life because they have employment data, they've got median incomes, they've got, look, you want to know property values? They have all of that there. You can get all of that data. You just got to learn how to use it. And so just for the final thing I like to talk to you guys about is your voice matters. Your voice matters. Um, I definitely would love to have you guys to send me, any questions or comments or anything that you guys would like to ask or, as we go through this final takeaway, because, what's at stake right now is something that I think is very important to each and every last one of us, and that is survival. So, like I said, if you guys want to, those that are on, you can please go to the chat. You can send me any questions that you like, any comments, and we can talk about that. And because I definitely love to hear some of your stories where I can share them while we're doing this. We've got what's that? We've got less than 10 minutes now before we find out what's the final word. And also, I'm encouraging you guys, like I did earlier, I'm encouraging the civic engagement because it's definitely what has to happen. But also, I want to champion the community resilience because that resilience is what we all need to have, especially right about now. Because if at midnight this actually comes to fruition that the government shuts down, then we all know that we're all going to be in a situation that is going to put us in a situation that we're not ready for, we don't really want, but it's a real thing. So, in that case, I'm going to say to you, you guys need to be strong. You guys need to come up with a plan. But let me just tell you this. In doing this show, I'm doing this show to be informative, and I want you guys to know that being informative is what we do here at American Black and White. But if any of you decide that you needed to send me a question or you wanted to talk to me about anything, please send me an email to America and Black and White podcast at gmail.com and we can chat. That's not a problem. You can, or else you can go to our website, americaandblackandwhite.us, and you can go there to my calendar. You can schedule, a 30-minute chat, and we can chat from there as well. So, I want to give you guys that opportunity because I think this is the time where we all need to collaborate and be lenient with each other and make things about as best as we could possibly make them for each and every individual. Because, this platform is for the betterment of everybody, that's in the underserved and marginalized communities in particular, because that's what we're about. We're also about reaching out and also including those that are a part of the LGBTQ community because, everybody is under one, everybody is one. And so we're here to support, we're here to be that resource, and we're here to help as best as we possibly can. Because Here at America in Black and White, everybody gets that opportunity. Everybody gets that opportunity to lift their voice and do the things that they know that they can do. And so let me just check again here. Let me see if there's been any changes here in this process. Because, oh man, this looks like, um, this looks like it's not midnight, but this is looking like this is going to shut down. Mm. Ah, yeah, this is yeah, this is there's no update whatsoever here as of the last one that I saw, and what it showed me is yeah, they just put this out, which this is the one that occurred at about 8:30. There was a second funding bill that they tried to get through, but it failed in the Senate, and the government shutdown is considered to be imminent. And so, with that being said, that means that most likely we're at that point. And so, oh wow, uh, yep. So let me ask you guys, for those of you that are actually watching, I want to ask you, how many of you, have been a part of one of these government shutdowns, and what was the effect that you felt when you were a part of this? I'd like to know. You can put your answer in the chat. Well, we're at the 2 minute countdown. We've got 2 minutes before midnight. We've got 2 minutes before midnight. Wow. Mhm. Well, as much as I hate to say this, ladies and gentlemen, I think the government shutdown is inevitable. And we have to mark this date, September 30th, 2025, the U.S. government shut down. Oh man, this is a wild one, but I just hope that in all of this that there is a silver lining. That's what I'm hoping. And so, if there is a silver lining, then I hope that it's one that can be for the betterment of each and every individual, because it's one of those things that nobody's over the other, nobody's better than the other, because we're all affected by this. We're all affected by this. And let me look at just one last time here and see if there's anything new here. Oh man, let's see. Okay. Um, well, well. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we are actually officially at midnight. The government has shut down. The government has shut down. So I want to thank you all for watching. And for those of you that actually stayed here throughout this time, I appreciate you so much. And I will tell you, as you have watched this episode, if you would please do us the honor of subscribing and enabling all notifications to our YouTube channels. I would definitely appreciate that. And, so you can actually watch every episode live as well as watch all of our previous recorded events. And you can also join our community. I want to thank you all. Wait, no, here's a question down here, something here in the chat. Yep, it is official. So I want to thank you all, and I will see you guys next time. So please continue to watch America in Black and White. Watch us tomorrow nights. We have another episode that's going to be great for you guys tomorrow night. And just please watch us and enjoy. And I want to thank you all for your time tonight.